Welcome back to Beagle Eye Visions. We are on episode 52, titled Ancient Freemasonry of the CubbyWhole podcast. It's going to be a very good one. It's running at an hour and 39 minutes. Um, this one and the last one, I highly recommend that you watch with the slides. You can learn a lot more at a much faster pace. They help so much. But, you know, we're going to keep grinding. Boston is absolutely gorgeous this time of year. Not sure what I'm gonna do. I need a lot more steel. I'm gonna start repairing all my power armor at the at Red Rocket gas station. So I need more steel. I'm gonna search for that. Search for more materials and keep hunting for death claws. All right. So we're gonna get some more knowledge. Thank you if you made it this far, internet. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Grindin. Here we go.
And that's one of the things about religion that we have to remember when we're talking about that makes it such a hot topic issue is because we're talking about law. Who gets to be God? Who gets to be God's deputies? Who is the Most High? Who is the divine authority? It's all about the claim to the Most High. The only way that somebody can be higher than us is if we give away our power. Because there's nobody, we're all equal. But we're not equal in our knowledge, so ultimately I think it does have to be a hierarchy, but it has to be a cooperative hierarchy like a bee colony. It's about what our value system is, what we care about.
November the 19th, 2021. I'm your host, Nate Cap. Welcome to the 52nd CubbyWhole podcast, where important topics are unveiled, discussed, and tested. The website for this show is CubbyWhole.com. That's CubbyWhole.com. You can now listen to this podcast on Spotify, Apple, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Minds.com, Amazon Music, Odyssey, YouTube, and much more. Today, we have Douglas Martin back on the show. How you doing, Doug?
Doing real good. How you doing, Nathan?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for coming on today. It has definitely been a while.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So before we go any further into this show, I just want to give a quick overview of the last episode, number 51, where I took us into the Fellowcraft degree of esoteric Freemasonry. And in that show, I basically covered the porch of Solomon's temple with the pillars, the terrestrial and celestial pillars. Plus, I also covered the knowledge of natural law, but just a basic understanding of natural law that really must be understood by the student before passing on the porch through the pillars. And I gave a brief description of the winding staircase, the 3, the 5, and the 7, including the 3 tools, the 3 tools on the first 3 steps, the first 3 degrees, which is the square, the level, and the plumb rule. And then and then up towards the middle of the staircase is the 5 steps, which is the 5 senses, which the student must master to be able to see beyond, especially be able to see the hidden realm, see beyond the physical. And then the 7 liberal arts, including the trivium and quadrivium, which teaches big world picture thinking and especially critical thinking. And towards the end, I broke down the square and compass symbol with the capital letter G in the middle. And I also gave a little powerful word at the very end, a green language word. So lots to ruminate on and contemplate.
What was the word?
The word was Jesus.
Oh, yeah, I love that. That was great.
And so there's lots more to come on the second degree. And if you have anything you wanted to say on any of that, please
I
feel
wanted
free.
to commend you. You've been doing a fantastic job laying it out, and I'm very impressed. I see a major improvement in the show in general, and you're doing a fantastic job. I definitely feel a strong need to be there on the front line there, helping to hash that out with you, and that's what I'm here to try to do. But yeah, Freemasonry and understanding the esoteric Freemasonry is one of the most important things that we can accomplish in a lifetime, and most people never seem to have achieved it, and that includes people that have joined the brick and mortar lodge systems, and it's a concern, and I think you're doing a fantastic job laying that out. You know, we're laying the foundations for understanding the deeper aspects of esoteric knowledge and lost knowledge and lost history. So it's a difficult task. You're doing a really great job laying the foundations. Sometimes it feels like, you know, maybe that the walls are closing in to the point where we don't have time to fully lay it all out, because this tyranny is accelerating at an exponential curve or an exponential rate.
Right.
And the foundations have to be laid. We have, you know, for me, I mean, I just want to tell you that I learned natural law, and that was the key that I picked up and took into the darkness of antiquity, and went into the anthropology with that key and tried to take it further and recover as much as what had been lost in the history of Egypt, as well as the mystery schools themselves. And I do feel that there's enough information now that is available that we can solve this problem. But I don't think that enough people understand the breadth of that information and the magnitude of that information, and they haven't put it in focus to discern what is the most important information. But I laid out in my new presentation what I felt were the most important authors. So I'm hoping that people will start to look into those authors and understand that most people don't really understand what's going on, because there's a lot more involved than what they've even learned or considered in many cases. And it's only when we get into the sublime information that we're going to discover what's really eluding most people. So
we haven't heard you talk anything about the Seed Conference, so I definitely want to hear that. But one of the things that, if people aren't familiar with your presentation that you gave at the Seed Conference, it's titled The Origins of Secret Societies Part 2. And I'd like to, well, first of all, let's hear what you have to say, or what you thought about the Seed Conference. I've really been wanting to hear that on air, and I'm sure a lot of other people do too.
yeah, I've been wanting to talk about it, and I'm glad to be back on here with you talking about it, or with the opportunity to talk about it. So we pulled it off, you know, and there were definitely some technical glitches, but the autonomy team pulled us through, and without their help, I don't think we could have pulled it off. But
right,
that's why we had that contingency. And I'd like to say that the next conference that we could figure out a way to pull it off without the autonomy team. Not that we don't want them involved, but we want to get our technical game up to speed. But yeah, I mean, I'm very pleased with the way it came off. I'm definitely blown away by the information that was presented. I was very pleased with the speakers that participated, and their material was superb. And I've never even participated or even been to a conference that had material that was on par, and everything complemented everything else, and everything was part of the same message. I've never seen anything like that, and I certainly have never been a part of anything like that. So in that way, I felt that it was a monumental success.
I agree.
The technicals were the biggest issue, and there were some. I really, quite frankly, was not prepared to host because I didn't expect to be hosting. I was there to pick up the ball if somebody dropped the ball, and I did the best I could with it. In retrospect, I realized I could have been a hell of a lot more prepared.
Same.
I did not expect to basically carry the whole conference, but I don't have a problem with it, and I'm not complaining because it was a great experience for me, and ended up in the Q&A with Passio, basically hosting a whole show there. That was an experience of a lifetime. I've always wanted to do that, and I hope to do it again soon.
Yeah, I couldn't be there. I got kicked out. I didn't have a way back in. Zoom just knocked me out, and I couldn't. Well,
that's all right. I saw the look on your face. I could tell you were probably just about done.
Yeah, I was pretty bummed, but whatever. It was cool just listening to you guys, and you guys.
I think we were both exhausted at that point.
Yeah, for sure.
That was about 30 hours into it. But no, you did a fantastic job, and you've been doing a great job on your CubbyWhole platform there, and I'm glad to be a part of that. I want to give you some more material, and I intend to make up for some lost time here, but the conference itself was awesome, and we were concerned, thinking that Brandon wasn't going to get his presentation in time, and he did, and it was an awesome one, and a good lengthy one, too. And some of the other speakers I had been unfamiliar with, and they definitely impressed. So I was very pleased with the cooperation on everybody's part. And there's a lot of things I would like to have gone smoother, but overall, there's nothing else to compare it to because there's no conferences that I know of that have that hard hitting of a message.
Right.
You know, now, and then as far as my own work is concerned, it's taken everything I had to just bring what I understand about the chronology that was lost in Egypt and the science that was taught in the mystery schools. And that's been what my focus has been on. But I have a lot of other knowledge. And now that I have some of that finally, documented, that's I'm ready to talk about some of the other things that I've negated to discuss in the past. But I think that ultimately, if we really want the solution, I just can't see leaving that off the table because it has to be dealt with. And, it's such a huge weight off my shoulders to get that on the table. But, and I understand that it's going to take time for people to fully understand what it means, and it's advanced in that sense, but it's not meant to be out of reach.
Right.
I did this work because once I began to understand it, I began to understand that the problems that we're faced with today are essentially the same problems that we've had for the last, 50,000 years. And we can certainly say since the Greeks or since the beginning of history, we have the same dilemma. And the dilemma is that we don't understand the ancient expression of the Egyptians. And the reason that's so important is because the knowledge that we're talking about took so long to develop and understand. Once it had been lost, it's potentially not recoverable. So,
yeah, that was something that you said in your presentation that I felt had so much value, where you said that, any place that a secret can easily be destroyed is not worth knowing in regards to the pyramids and constellations. Is that something you can explain for the audience, what you meant by that?
Yeah, basically, the ancients are one reason that people, I think, don't understand why the pyramids were built is because they don't have a concept of an entire civilization united in its task.
Right.
So they have no concept of the amount of time it would take to complete a project like that, and an entire civilization being devoted for that amount of time to complete a project like that. So trying to paint the picture that temple was accomplished in the span of a single lifetime, I think that's part of the fallacy. So, you know, we have plenty of evidence to show that the later Egyptian temples, which are mostly solar in their origin, but there are some lunar temples still remaining, but not very many. But there's a lot more solar temples. But we can see there's clear evidence, for instance, at Luxor, that temple had been built in different stages by different, or different generations. So each section of Luxor were built on, or it was expanded. So the point I'm trying to make is that temple was not built in a single lifetime, and that it was the accomplishment of multiple generations. And then the pyramids are the grandest example of that. So trying to have a feasible concept of how those were completed in a single lifetime, I don't think you'll ever find an answer to that, because that's not possible and that's not what took place. But I guess the emphasis I'm trying to put on is an entire civilization united in its task, and its task to build the grandest temple to the great architect of the universe, and as a repository of time and measurement, and to store all of the knowledge, the sum total of the knowledge that they had up to that point. But see, it's knowledge that deals with how we discover and harmonize with the laws in nature. So this is a body of knowledge that can't afford to be squandered or lost. And when we consider man's ambition to dominate nature, then we start to understand the reasons how the original wisdom could become a nuisance, because that would be negative interference from man's ambition. Like the idea of the Christ. Jesus was said to be, the divine incarnation of the Great Spirit. But yet on the ground, he was seen as negative interference. So the way I like to say that is that, he was murdered so people could get back to their Bill worship. Or he was murdered so people could get back to their immoral behavior, which is the religion of statism and the religion of money, or serving 3 or 4 masters. I mean, I always think of it as the need for the protection of the state is the need for protection for immoral behavior. And we'll talk about that. We'll get into orthodoxy. Because the whole idea of a republic, for instance, is that we have a certain set of ideals, and then we're going to annex a certain territory and have an imaginary boundary there. And inside of that territory, we are going to defend an orthodoxy that's defined by a code of law. So that's the idea of the republic, is that we enshrine inalienable rights, and those rights cannot be compromised. So it's a fail-safe for a democracy, for instance. The idea that democracy is 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Democracy is mob rule, which means rule by the most ignorant. So the idea of a republic is to enshrine certain inalienable rights, and that's an orthodoxy, and that is the protection or the fail-safe for a potential democracy where we can allow average citizens or a slave class to participate in affairs of the state without risking having our inalienable rights compromised. So the Greek democracy, or the democracy, is a Greek ideal, and the republic is a Roman ideal. Both these ideas, of course, are older. We know the idea of a republic comes from Sumer and the Code of Hammurabi, and it's older than that even. But the point is where classical history picks up. We are introduced to democracy as a Greek ideal and the idea of a republic as a Roman ideal. And the republic represents the orthodoxy, and the democracy represents the liberal in the sense of open to interpretation or potential to innovate. So that can be a threat to the republic through revisionism. And the whole point I'm making is the republic is a fail-safe for democracy, but it's also a fail-safe to enshrine inalienable rights. So the term conservative means orthodoxy, and that's typically associated with the idea of the republic. Yeah, and we'll keep talking about this. So that's one thing I want to do, is just keep this going until we make sure that we're satisfied with what we've discussed.
Right. Yeah, you actually just answered a question that I already had, so that's very...
And well, the other question that you asked about the secrecy, the idea was they built the pyramids to store knowledge in a structure that was so robust it couldn't be destroyed. And then before that, they had venerated in the cosmos, where it absolutely cannot be destroyed, could still be recovered, even if it had been lost. That was the idea.
Right.
That was the contingency for lost knowledge. So the idea of putting knowledge in something delicate that could easily be destroyed is a fallacy, or it's kind of erroneous thinking. I mean, something like that could only be serving man's ambition, because the whole point about lost knowledge, there was knowledge in the past that was held back. The Aten is a good example. We can talk about that. But that's advanced. The point I'm making, though, is the dilemma that humankind is faced with is how do we teach the ignorant masses these advanced sciences? And then how do we teach academia the lost expression of these sciences? Because academia wants to scoff and mock the mythology because they don't understand that it's an expression of the science. And without the science, we can't survive in this world as a species.
So speaking of the republic and democracy, usually the republic is associated with Christianity, and democracy is usually associated with atheism. And something that I notice that's really interesting when I speak with those who have a faith, like, Christians, and to those who are atheists, I notice that Christians tend to have a little bit more of an open mind to deeper ideas and sacred sciences than atheists do. And something you said in your presentation about initiation, which I kind of talked about on my last show, it really struck me because I've had to deal with this, I've had to deal with, people who are very resistant to these deeper ideas, and those who are more open-minded, but they've kind of chosen a faith. They're very religious. So that would typically be like Christianity. But in your presentation, you get into the history of secret societies, talking about how in order to be initiated into a mystery tradition, you had to join a faith, right? So, and you also said that the mystery schools would not consider anyone who was atheistic or unteachable, right, into the mystery schools. And that's something that I was hoping you could explain or elaborate on a little further, because I really find that very interesting.
You said yourself right there at the beginning that the Christians seem to be a little bit more open-minded than the typical atheist. And what you meant, I took that as what you meant by that was that they were more open-minded to spiritual concept.
Right. Yep.
So that makes sense because they've already accepted the idea of a creator, whereas an atheist has rejected the idea of a creator.
Right.
And it's important to point out that the ideology of atheism is a religion in and of itself. It's a belief system. So, you've already answered your own question in a sense that part of the reason that they're more receptive is because they've accepted the idea of spiritual possibilities. Whereas an atheist is prepared to outright, rigidly, skeptically reject any spiritual prospect. And then in the ancient mystery schools, let's say the pre-Augustus or the pre-Christian era, the mystery schools were an essential function of the society. But that in order to enter into the mystery school, you had to have chosen a faith, which means that you had to openly admit that you have faith that there is such a thing as a creator.
Right.
And what you can call God or what have you. But the idea was that there's a sacred body of law, and the purpose of the secret society is to flesh out and uphold the sacred body of law. So they have what's called the VSL. And the VSL is the volume of sacred law.
Right.
So whatever your chosen faith is as an initiate, when you come to the podium, you bring your volume of sacred law, and then we offer the tools and the implementation from antiquity to flesh out the deeper spiritual meaning of the sacred volume or the volume of sacred law that you've brought. So part of that concept is related to the fact that all of these faiths originally stem from something older. And the older knowledge is stored in the implementation. So what that basically means is for us to flesh out the esoteric meaning of the exoteric faith, we can't really do so without the aid of the implementation and the tools from the ancient mystery schools. And whatever your VSL is, it's respected.
Right.
And that's important because we all understand the prospect of a holy war could be biblical prophecy realized, and it is a real impending danger. So we have a responsibility to avert that. So we ultimately do need to reconcile culture. We ultimately do need to reconcile cultural epistemology. And I know most people that are interested in freedom and starting out on this journey probably aren't that far along, and many may never get that far along. Like I say, I've gone into the anthropology. I wanted to carry the torch of natural law into the darkness of antiquity and try to really reconnect with origins, because I feel that without that, we're cut off from truth, and we're cut off from our elders of antiquity and an ancient body of wisdom that took longer to develop than any knowledge that we have left in the world. So that's a big part of the problem. We're talking about ancient wisdom. We're talking about a body of knowledge that took longer to develop than anything we have left. Now, most of what we have in today's world is built on that knowledge. It's built on top of it. But the foundations were squandered. So if we don't recover those foundations, we only have a partial knowledge.
Right.
For which we cannot take responsibility for because we just don't have the means to possess it. We don't have the necessary temperament to deal with it. In other words, we will be destroyed by it.
Right.
It's similar to the allegory in the movie animated film Heavy Metal. That green orb. It kind of overtakes you because you don't have the spiritual armor to resist the power that you're wielding. It's very similar to that in the sense. And, you know, the idea of man's ambition and man's pursuit of power and ultimately man overthrowing the creator and becoming God. That's the big conundrum that we all have a responsibility to deal with. But part of what I was saying is people that are going into the freedom community or the freedom movement, they may never go into the anthropology. And I wouldn't say that that's absolutely necessary for everybody or even most people. But I would say that it's imperative for our better minds. Because if we don't understand what happened in the chronology of Egypt, we don't really understand any of the knowledge that we have in the world today, and we don't understand what the responsibility is having that knowledge. Because, you know, the way I say it is that we developed the lesser mysteries in the early Egyptian cults, but those were squandered and lost in exchange for pursuit of the greater mysteries, which gave us the power to wield the forces of nature. And that the original stellar civilization that built the pyramids held back the Aten because they knew it would give man powers of 10, and the powers of 10 would allow man to develop and dominate nature and develop physical technologies that deal with physical mechanics of the physical world and can easily negate spiritual principles. So there's a lot to that, and I want to keep talking about it.
It's interesting what you're talking about with regards to being able to, you know, go back in time and understanding anthropology with respect to the ancient Egyptian mythos. And this is something that I'm trying to convey with these tracing boards that I've been talking about in the past couple of shows on how we use these boards to, we bring the knowledge that we learn about these boards, we bring them to these boards, and the board is, the tracing board is the information, and as we bring knowledge to it, especially knowledge regarding the ancient Egyptian mythos, then it starts to reveal something to us about ourselves in the now. And I'm wondering if that is something that you would like to expand on, because I know you know quite a bit about the tracing boards.
Well, I was blown away when you were talking about it in your shows recently. I think you did a really good job explaining the significance of it, particularly that it could be carried in memory and then made portable in that way and then just brought out and drawn and worked with anywhere you go. I thought that was very profound because that gives us a means of carrying the knowledge in the book out of Egypt without having a physical copy.
Right.
That's part of the genius of it. That's part of the genius of the whole mythos in general, is that it is the key to our salvation and it is the key to our evolution as a species, but also the key to how the knowledge was proliferated and survived into the modern world. Because we have to consider that it otherwise would not have. So we have to humble ourselves to the point where we at least respect the elders that endeavored to find ways for this knowledge to traverse through the course of time and survive all of the collapses of civilizations through history and still emerge as recoverable in the modern world. Because if we can't recover it, we will not be able to stem this tide and divert this course. So the whole genius and the appreciation for what has taken place in the past, I think, should be about that. Because we don't understand that, then we don't really understand what they're endeavoring to do. They're not just endeavoring to preserve knowledge, they're endeavoring to pass knowledge forward. So there's an awareness that the knowledge could be lost. There's an awareness that the knowledge could be compromised. Now, why would that be the case? Because at some point that knowledge is going to become hostile to new ideas, or new ideas are going to become hostile to that based on man's ambition. So the whole idea is to create a contingency for man's ambition. And the respect that's due to the elders of antiquity is that they found a way to preserve this knowledge all the way into the modern world. Not enough scholars have managed to recover it yet to appreciate that, but the ones that have proved that that's the case. And I'm talking specifically about J. Norman Lockyer, Albert Churchward, and specifically Gerald Massey.
Yeah, all three amazing authors, and very, very much recommended if anyone has not looked into their work. So, but yeah, this information that has been left for us by these ancient Egyptian elders is so powerful, and they have managed to not only understand these sciences, but then we're able to store them somewhere that we can eventually come to understand in the future, just because these places in our universe, you know, especially the Polaris, you know, the Little Bear constellation, the information that is stored there is completely protected, and it's been protected for, you know, since the beginning, since, you know, the stellar people were able to store that information within this constellation to help us understand how to align ourselves with nature and be balanced. Because that's the other thing about the tracing boards that are what they're trying to help us understand about ourselves is equilibrium, because equilibrium is all about bringing our imbalances into harmony, so that way we have a nice frequency that harmonizes with nature and doesn't go against nature. And that's what the constellation and that's what these sacred sciences do. And if we really take ourselves serious and we really want to, you know, not get into these big wars all around the world, taking this information serious is really what's going to help us have a better future for ourselves and for the children of the future and for the life of the earth. And it is so amazing that they have built these, well, you know, they discovered these sciences. They created ways of preserving these sciences in something like the zodiac, so we can understand ourselves in consciousness and the ways in which we are able to harvest, you know, to know when to plant and when to harvest, you know. and how that corresponds.
The balance.
Right.
To maintain the balance.
Right. And how that corresponds with our consciousness is so brilliant. It's so amazing. And this is the science that people shoo away. No one wants this science that can actually bring us.
It doesn't have any utility.
Right.
The only utility that it has to offer is the survival of the human species.
Right.
And most people don't understand that. But if they did, they're not really interested in it. They're only interested in their own game. So that is an indication that they see life as one and out. And that is an atheistic prospect. And or that post-mortem they're traveling off to some other world.
Right.
So I think it's important to put the emphasis on there is no other world. There is nowhere else you're going to go. But it does take a lot of work, and it takes a lot of care, and that's what's lacking. I mean, the goddess is in exile, in rags.
Right.
So if you're looking for the goddess, you will need to stray from the Gospels, because the Gospels is becoming orthodoxy. So you will need to stray into the wilderness where you may encounter Pan and all of that. It's part of the task at hand. And the whole idea of encountering Pan is just confronting the ego itself and knowing that the ego is going to try to deceive you and try to trick you to divert you off of the path in pursuit of the goddess, which is the care. And it's the feminine creative principle that we cannot exist or survive without. And there's a lot of different ways we can say it, but I think that came out pretty good.
I'm glad you brought up Pan. I was watching your presentation the other day, and, you know, I picked up on this before, but man, the way that you describe Pan, if you want to, I'd like to hear you talk about it, but there was, I think you said something along the lines of Pan meaning to spread out, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, it's full range.
Full range, yeah. And then I started thinking, oh, okay, well, that makes sense where our pan on the fire comes from, you know, when you're cooking. So if you want to go ahead and explain a little bit about Pan, I think people would really appreciate that.
Well, it's an ancient Greek nature god, and basically it was depicted as a half-man, half-animal creature that you would encounter if you strayed too far into the wilderness. But it was a nature deity, and it ultimately became our archetypal image of our Christian devil. And that's my claim, that it ultimately, that is the source of our archetypal Christian devil, because I believe the devil card in A.E. Waite's Tarot was derived from Pan, and then our image of the archetypal Christian devil was likely derived from that. But it's also derived from ram symbolism. I think that's probably the purest source of it. We have to understand how significant ram symbolism is, because it's one of the most ancient symbols. And at some point, it became hostile to new doctrines, or new doctrines became hostile to it. And I think the Age of Aries plays into that, where we could have put too much emphasis on the ram in the Age of Aries, just like we would put too much emphasis on Taurus in the Age of Taurus, or on the bull in the Age of Taurus. Mm-hmm. Those are factors, you know, and so the zoo type phenomenon, it's so ancient that it's not understood. And the knowledge of the zoo typology is definitely in peril. But what we have to understand is, if new doctrines are threatened by more ancient doctrines, then they are endeavoring to marginalize and ultimately obliterate ancient doctrines. So we have to be careful just trying to throw any babies out with the bathwater. You know, we need all of the knowledge that we have to work with. And I got a little distracted from your original question there. But yeah, Pan is, it's very significant because to really fully understand it, we have to understand the situation with the Greeks. There is nescience. They do not understand the Egyptian. And what we have in the modern world, we inherited from the Greeks because the Hebrews took from Babylon what was already a corrupted Egyptian, and they brought us the Torah from that, what we know as the Old Testament. And then the Greeks took from the Hebrews what was already a corrupted Babylonian account of a corrupted Egyptian, and the Romans took from the Greeks, and classical scholars passed that on into the modern world, or carried that into the modern world. So we, like I said, we have the same dilemma then as we have now. We do not understand the mythological mode of expression of the Egyptians. So if we scoff at that, that's basically our own death now. Because without that knowledge, personally, I don't think we can stem this tide. It's been the whole source of the dilemma since we strayed from the source of the original body of knowledge. So that's something that's very important to understand, and I've been wanting to try to say this, so let me try to say this. The three phases of the evolution of the Egyptian mythology are stellar, lunar, and solar. We have to understand that the stellar is the longest lasting, anywhere from 300,000 to 600,000 years, a lasting civilization that had tried socialism in its beginnings and abandoned it, never to return to it. Because they had discovered that socialism only works in groups of 100 or less. So keep that in mind. And they had abandoned it, never to return to it. So the idea that the pyramids were built by slaves is totally a fallacy. The pyramids were built by an entire civilization that lasted longer than any other civilization in human history and was united in its task. And one of the most significant things to understand about that is that civilization never did collapse. What happened is it moved into the lunar phase of the mythology. And when it did that, that constituted an advancement in the mythology, but at the same time, it constituted a departure from source. And then when we get to the solar phase, it's even more of a branch off the branch of the departure from source. So we're straying even farther from source. And then past the halfway point, or at least, somewhere in the course of the solar phase, we reverted back to socialism. And I want to just go ahead and point out here that, that Babylon exists, or the original Babylonians were originally stellar. And that means that civilization is more than 150,000 years old. But that civilization was infiltrated by the later solar cult during Amen-Ra, which was a day sky prospect. And the corruption happened there. And I would say the socialism started there too, before it came back to Egypt. But ultimately, it was socialism and bureaucracy that caused the collapse of Egypt, and that happened in the solar phase. So in that respect, the stellar civilization never collapsed. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind, and that's why I put so much emphasis on it. But because I think one of the things that's not understood is that bureaucracy and socialism is the cause of the fall of every great nation in human history. So let me say that again. Bureaucracy and socialism. Let me say it again. socialism and bureaucracy are the cause of the fall of every great nation in the history of the human race. And because I've never heard anybody else say that, I have to think that people don't understand it. And when I say socialism, I mean any form of coercive government with centralized control. So this idea of capitalism is a facade. We've never experienced any such thing. And with centralized control of resources, we have no potential to ever experience such a thing. But, you know, at the grandest scale of understanding spirituality, we're here to help each other. So if anybody's trying to get a leg up, that's social Darwinism. And even a barter system would lead to social Darwinism. So I think it's a beautiful thing, because ultimately the spiritual lesson is we have to learn how to share and help each other.
Yep.
And that's a grand spiritual lesson. But at the same time, you know, through the discovery of the mystery schools, we can discover that there's a clear design on our liberty. And that is absolute 100% proof of an intelligent design. So if you can prove that there's a clear design on our liberty, which we've talked about, natural law, as morality declines, freedom declines, then there is no denying that there's an intelligent design. And that's one reason people have an aversion to it. They don't want to accept that because it completely uproots or is an upheaval for their own lifelong built paradigm that they've used to survive and interact in the world. So it's a tremendous threat to their very existence. You have to keep that in mind when you're trying to reach people.
Absolutely.
And you can see I'm ready to keep going on and on about this, and that's not the point. I don't want to make it rhetorical, but I want to make sure that we get it explained as well as we can.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess that's a good spot to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have some intro music. Heck yeah. So, man, Doug is such a legend. I love every episode he's on. He always has such intense and intuitive, very astute knowledge that takes a lot of understanding. It takes a lot of time to understand too. I wish I knew which books to point to help understand Freemasonry. I guess any Manly P. Hall is. I listened to a couple Manly P. Hall books here on Spotify that are available. Actually, you can look them up. But anyways, stay tuned. There will be more next episode. We're going to keep grinding. Wrap up episode number 52 of Ancient Freemasonry of CubbyWhole Podcast with Douglas Martin and Nate Cap. Stay tuned and stay golden.